All right, I think we can get started. We're, as usual, on student schedule, and people will keep coming in. I'm Anne Marie Slaughter, a professor of politics and international affairs, and I have the great pleasure today of introducing Aneesh Chopra as today's Connor D. Riley Distinguished Visitor in Leadership and Governance. This lecture and this program is named in memory of Connor D. Riley, who was a graduate of Harvard Law School in 1975. He actually originally went to MIT. You may be wondering why this lecture is endowed at Princeton, but I'm about to get to that. He was a partner in Gibson, Dunn, and Crutcher in New York, and was very active in his community and very interested in all things technological. I've just heard that he was the first lawyer in New York to use a BlackBerry. He would have been particularly excited at the subject today. The program brings prominent public leaders to Princeton who cannot stay for a full semester, and that is true of most, but it allows them to visit for a shorter time and to give a public lecture and interact with our students. Connor Riley's personal connection to Princeton is strengthened by his wife, Margaret Cannella, who was the class of '73, and both of his children, Kate Riley, who was the class of '05, and I had the great pleasure of working with her. I'm not sure it was mutual, but I think it was for a year after she graduated. When I was dean here, she was absolutely indispensable. And Michael Riley, the class of 12. So we have had we've had tremendous ties to the Riley family, and it really is wonderful to be able to have this program and to introduce this lecture. Aneesh's lecture today is the Open Innovators Toolkit, Empowering a New Generation of Problem Solvers. He was the first Federal Chief Technology Officer appointed in 2009 by President Obama and held the position until early 2012. He was involved in what the White House called a dizzying array of accomplishments. Not bad when you step down, including the National Wireless Strategy, the Open Government Initiative Data.gov, the modernization of government records, talk about a thankless task, and upgrades to electronic health records for veterans. This whole idea of even having a chief technology officer is a major step forward as far as I'm concerned. Many state governments now have a chief technology officer, the city of Washington does, and finally the federal government. Prior to being chief technology officer in the administration, he was the Secretary of Technology for the Commonwealth of Virginia. I grew up in Virginia. I assure you we did not have a Secretary of Technology. From 2006 to 2009. And there he integrated social media networks into an overall platform with lots of practical applications. Again, things like disseminating health information to small-town Virginia doctors. This is the kind of thing at the State Department that we worked on all over the world, in Africa and Asia. We need it in many states of the Union every bit as much. He also served as a managing director with the Advisory Board Company, which is a publicly traded healthcare think tank. He has consistently streamlined the use of technology for public benefit, fostering new ideas and encouraging government-wide coordination to help us meet public policy goals on everything from job creation to reducing healthcare costs to protecting national security. So please join me in welcoming Aneesh Chopra as the Connor D. Riley Distinguished Fellow.
A wonderful opportunity to come back. I was born not too far from here at the Mercer Medical Center in Trenton. And I was raised in Plainsboro, New Jersey. My mom and dad are here. And upon the invitation, which was very kind, thank you, Margaret, I suppose, to your leadership in arranging the invitation, I didn't even hesitate a beat because it would be a homecoming. And it's a homecoming for a number of reasons. One, I get to see my old friends. I have a classmate of mine from high school in the audience. But also a chance to reconnect with those who made a big impact on my life. My third grade public school teacher is in the room, Linda Brusheye, and I spoke of her in my Senate confirmation hearings because of the impact that she had in my life, and I'll say more about that in my remarks. It actually has relevance to some of the material I'd like to share with you. But most importantly, it's a chance to bring my wife and my kids to this area, since we don't get to come home all that often, and I'm here with my beautiful wife Rohini and my two daughters. If they behave themselves, I'm sure they will, right girls? During this lecture. Okay, there it is. We got the world of approval. This is very much an opportunity to share a bit about what we learned in the Obama administration about the power of technology, data, and innovation, and its application to solve the big challenges of our day. One more final point of personal privilege before I share some opening remarks. I am very pleased that the Princeton family has embraced some of the most incredible leaders we've had in Washington. Seeing Dean Rouse, my former colleague who served in the Council of Economic Advisors, take on the helm of this institution is exciting. And Ed Felton, the brother-in-arms, Chief Technology Officer for the Federal Trade Commission, I guess in part still on contract or whatever the firm is that rules. But to have that type of capacity here is just, in addition, of course, to our wonderful faculty throughout the enterprise, very important, and it's going to serve our country well to have exposure to these folks moving forward. I'm going to put out an outline as to the remarks that I want to share with you, but I want to begin by taking us halfway around the world on a very exciting journey that I took upon with the President of the United States in visiting a rural village in India, which was not part of his official tour when he had visited India. And I want to talk about this story in the context of the global movement towards this open innovation topic we're going to get into. That we're not limited in its use only in the industrialized world that has all the fancy iPads and smartphones and so forth, but we're seeing its power take hold in every corner of the world. I wanted to share with you the E-Panchayat initiative in particular because of the dramatic effects open data and open government and open innovation can have on the lives of everyday folks. This story is personal. One of my mentors is a man by the name of Sam Petrota. Sam is a Chicago resident who immigrated from India many years ago. In fact, he went to college with my dad. And after making money in the American economy, he decided to go back to India for basically a penny a year salary to build India's telecommunications network in the 1980s. You couldn't get a landline phone in India. It would take 3 to 6 months. Many of you in the audience, some of you are from India. And Sam chose an innovative path. He recruited several hundred engineers, and they designed from scratch a brand new telecommunications network that was cost effective enough for them to provide access to a telephone for every Indian by the end of that decade. Sam Petrota is today still a Chicago resident, but he is the equivalent of the Chief Technology Officer for the Prime Minister of India. Now, I share this story of Sam's background because Sam invited me to India as part of a State Department initiative called basically Track 2 Diplomacy, for those of you that are foreign policy experts. But in this context, it was a high-tech dialogue. We brought tech leaders from the United States in the private sector to visit with policymakers in India to try to bridge new opportunities for collaboration. That trip was in September. President Obama visited in November. In preparation for our trip, Sam decided to show us, not in memos or in words, but in actions, what it would mean to transform society at the ground level. He had ordered the week earlier that a fiber broadband connection be distributed to this one village in Rajasthan that had never seen paved roads or indoor plumbing or any of the modern infrastructure. But, Ed Felton, they would get not only fiber broadband, but 4G wireless communication for the entire village. This community didn't expect it or ask for it. It just happened to be coincidental that they were on the map close enough to where the nearest nodal point was for Sam to make an active demonstration. And our delegation visited and inaugurated this facility. Mind you, we're talking 3 months from when the thing turned on to when President Obama would interface. And in just those short weeks, we already saw unbelievable transformations. the president communicated to this group from downtown Mumbai. He was giving a speech to a bunch of students at a college campus in Mumbai. But he was able, through high-definition video, to communicate with the village as if they were together and sharing their stories live. The first of those stories put us on the right footing. A farmer said to the president, he asked the question, "How did your life change?" And the farmer responds and says, basically, "This has freed up my economic performance." He didn't use those words, but that was essentially what he had said. The year earlier, he was trying to get a loan for his, to borrow money for his crops for the upcoming season. Unfortunately for him, he didn't have a certified copy of his land records, which the bank needed in order to qualify the loan. To get one of those certified land records, he had to travel many miles to the urban core and walk into a government office and obtain those records. It's one thing to sit in the long lines of the DMV, which we're accustomed to, and sort of be frustrated, but in his circumstance, he shared the fact that he could not conduct the transaction. He didn't elaborate why, but it didn't take a stretch of the imagination to figure out how that conversation transpired. He simply told the president that that year he had to go to a moneylender who charged egregious rates in order for him to pay for the crop, the seeds and so forth. He then said this year, thanks to the E-Panchayat initiative, he walked into his trusted city center, city is the wrong word, the village community building, which I had actually visited. It's maybe the size of this little atrium here. And there had been a computer that had secure access to government records. He was able to log in and print his certified land records right there. No muss, no fuss, borrowed the money, off he went. The second story was of a nurse who said she could access the secure data of which children in the neighborhood, in the village, had been immunized, so she could be more productive with her time in making sure that they had access to high-quality health care. And the third story, a young man who was getting his MBA but chose to come home to be with his sick grandparent in the village, did not have to give up his MBA studying. He was able to take courses from the Panchayat Service Center. The president's words summed it up. One of the incredible benefits of technology is that it can be in the position us essentially to leapfrog the intermediate stages of government service delivery, avoiding the 20th century mechanisms for delivering services and going straight to the 21st. This E-Panchayat story and the opening up of government data to this village is taking hold in every village in every corner of the globe. Under Secretary Hillary Clinton's leadership, over 40 countries have signed on to a challenge the president issued at the UN just a couple years back in 2010, where he challenged the countries to come together a year later and sign on to an international open government partnership, voluntarily, without muss, without fuss, without any investment required. We now have over 55 pledged countries from around the world. Dozens have published and collaborated with their civil society to define what openness means for them. And we're starting to see impact on a scale you could never imagine. Nearly 2 billion people around the world live in countries that have pledged voluntarily to this openness movement. This was my opening story, but it's a story that has three parts for our discussion today. The power and the importance of innovation in the American story today, the tools and techniques that policymakers who graduate from this wonderful institution can take as they proceed in their public service careers. And finally, the notion that society is better off if we put these tools to work in uncovering the hidden talent that we know exists in every corner of the United States, and I believe in every community around the world. Let me begin with my remarks about the innovation imperative. The American economic story is obviously one that's at the center of our Washington debate. Have we lost our mojo? Will America see its economic prosperity rise to the levels and the separation between the American success story and the rest of the world? Or will we find ourselves falling flat, allowing a new generation of entrepreneurs and innovators globally to take on our role as leader? These are fundamental and difficult questions. But part of the way we answer them was what the president called for in September of 2009 when he unveiled his strategy for American innovation. More on that in a minute. But one of the key questions about our innovation economy is the degree to which our industries retool, strengthen their capacity to grow again. McKinsey ran a study that was published in 2010 that caught me off guard. It was the story of productivity growth turning into job growth. I had thought, naively, that if you're more productive, you can accomplish more with less, i.e. fewer workers for the output. I didn't quite understand how fewer workers meant more jobs. I needed a genius like Cece to give me more education about how all this works, but McKinsey said, here's how this works. Sectors that are more productive essentially put their capital to higher and better use, creating better products and services, expanding the economic pie, growing aggregate more jobs. And they took a look at the American economy, and you can see those sectors of the American economy that have shown productivity growth and positive job growth and creation or contribution to the GDP. But look down the list. Look at the sectors that are flat to negative on productivity growth. Government, healthcare, education. These are publicly influenced sectors of the economy. This slide actually was a beacon of hope. Tackling healthcare, tackling energy, tackling education, improving government service delivery. This wasn't just good for government. This could grow the economy. Insight number one. Put this into practice in insight number two. How does this work in the real world? I had the pleasure of calling on CTOs from the nation's most sophisticated and effective companies. Because, frankly, everyone returned my call when I worked for the president. That was surprising. Wow. So I cold called Bruce Brown, the CTO of Procter & Gamble. And I said, Bruce, you're running a pretty powerful technology operation at one of the most successful firms globally. I'd like to learn so that I can serve President Obama and our country better, based on your experiences. And he proceeded to share with me a whole number of things, but one of them was a challenge back. He said we had incorporated technology more effectively in our supply chain, in our manufacturing plants, but we had not seen the same results through our supply chain. Basically what he said was, we are more productive in making diapers than we were a decade ago, and that allows us to keep those diaper-making jobs in America. But the supply chain that produces products and services that we incorporate into the diapers, they're not as innovative or effective. So his first challenge to me was, could we do a better job together, public-private partnership, democratizing access to high-performance computing technologies that would allow us to strengthen the capacity of our supply chain, making them more productive and competitive in the global economy. Well, fast forward, we were successful. We launched the what we called Endemic Partnership, the Digital Engineering and Manufacturing Collaborative. We brought to the table companies like John Deere and GE and Boeing, Lockheed Martin, in addition to Procter & Gamble. And we brought federal agencies to the table as well. With a very small amount of money, we said, let's do some prototyping. Can we, in fact, democratize access to these technologies and improve a legacy industry that could benefit from these techniques? I'll just share one story about the power and possibility of this movement. It's the story of Jayco Plastics, a 25-person small business in Indiana. Jayco Plastics, on the surface, is like the Hallmark card of awesome. It's an American-made company using American ingenuity to build plastic crates using newer materials. That these plastic crates are strong enough to replace the Chinese-manufactured steel crates that had been the hallmark of what you would see on a factory floor. Great example. Encourage American manufacturers to swap out the Chinese-made steel crates for American-made, more innovative, more nimble, more efficient technologies. Here's the problem. Jayco couldn't sell the plastic crates. the manufacturing customers were not confident the plastic crates could hold the weight. Chicken and egg problem. Produce the crates, prove it can handle the weight, and we'll ship you the order. But he's a 25-person business. Didn't have the capital to fund the development of that first line of crates. Needed a customer to justify the investment. Chicken, egg. Chicken, egg. He was the first, I believe, or one of the first, to sign up to this free program. And the team at Purdue decided that they would run the model for him using a tool that they had built on manufacturinghub.org, which is now freely available to everybody. And they demonstrated what you see in the graphic. The plastic crate is strong. It can handle the challenge. Immediately, the customer signed a $2.5 million order. And Jayco is adding 7 people to the business. Now, I don't mean to be overtly political, but did Jayco need a tax cut? Did Jayco need regulatory removal? Jayco needed access to high-performance computing so that they could compete in a 21st century economy. The kind of capability that historically governments had invested in. A lot of this had been funded by the Department of Energy because we use high-performance computing in areas like nuclear stockpile manufacturing activity. Funny punchline of this story, we invited Bruce Brown to present to President Obama directly, and he was so impressed with the line he used it. I wish I had the direct quote, but it was something like, how does a nuclear program at the Los Alamos National Labs help diaper jobs in Pennsylvania? Or something to that effect. Said it much better than I could, but basically it was relaying that story. Procter & Gamble has achieved $1 billion in cash flow improvement because they were able to commercialize that modeling and simulation capability born originally out of Los Alamos Labs. And now, thanks to the Endemic Collaborative, democratizing back to small business owners around the world for free. The strategy for the President's strategy for American innovation is precisely this formula. It's an articulation of a role of government in a 21st century economy. One that is focused more on sustainable economic growth and less about chasing the next bubble. In fact, there was a whole riff that CC helped work on about avoiding the traditional model where we kind of chase the next bubble, and the idea was to, can we develop a growth strategy without bubbles? I think was the simple way we were describing it. Well, that growth strategy without bubbles has 3 key roles for government. The first of those roles is to redefine what infrastructure means in the 21st century economy. You and I think of infrastructure as roadways, railways, and runways. What the President did is he expanded that definition to include digital infrastructure, include human capital, and include research and development, the very investments that led to that endemic collaborative. Second, the President said that we're going to set rules of the road to foster productive innovation and entrepreneurship. And what that meant was, of course, in traditional terms, tax policies, tax credits, and the like. But it also meant strengthening our patent system, establishing a stronger base of internet policy principles. Thank you, Ed Felton. And establishing a new focus, a renewed focus, on the power of entrepreneurship and innovation as key elements of growth. You see, it had been recent that the Kaufman Foundation and others had looked at the commerce data to find that if you go back 30 years, nearly all net new jobs in America are the result of businesses less than 5 years old, in aggregate, expanding. That is, large companies grow and shrink, small businesses succeed and fail in every corner of America, but it's the high-growth new businesses that show disproportionate job growth relative to the failure rate, and that's what accounts to our economic success. So the President launched Startup America and signs the Jobs Act to emphasize the importance of entrepreneurship in the nation's economy. But today's lecture is about the top of the pyramid. What the President spoke of in his vernacular as being an all-hands-on-deck approach to solving problems. His theory was that Washington in many ways was the problem. You go to Washington to lobby Washington, to get Washington to take difference of, change behavior. Washington is where you go to get change. President felt that if we could find a way to harness the full power and potential of technology and innovation, we could tap into expertise in every corner of the country outside of Washington to collaborate with a more open and inviting Washington together to solve problems. The work we had done in our office, the Chief Technology Officer's office, and our network of friends and allies across the agencies who embraced this philosophy was to think about government as one big open innovation program. Remember, America was born a commonwealth in Virginia. I remember this because I was in the governor's cabinet when the Queen visited. It was very important when the Queen visits, you see. This is a big deal. And the Queen came to Jamestown and she reminded us that the spirit of commonwealth was, Jamestown was in 1607, this is 2007, that Jamestown was, we are a voluntary association of neighbors who come together to advance our collective good. That essentially is the sort of definition of commonwealth, which was the birthplace of American democracy. And so, in many ways, open innovation is just a 21st century version of a neighborly approach. If Ed is the genius on how to hack into voting machines, certainly we can put Ed's genius to work to solve problems of children's privacy on mobile apps. So we invite Ed to come to Washington to work that problem. This is what we can do in open innovation. Its four features: the power of data and how its use and its reuse can empower a new generation. It's about a role of government as an impatient convener, taking on that commonwealth notion that the Queen had outlined. It's issuing challenges, prizes, and competitions as a new form of government acquisition to tap into everyday folks, not government contractors that have PhDs in procurement physics. And it's about attracting and supporting top talent who come in formal full-time jobs, like I had the CTO job, or those who want to volunteer their time from their neighborhood to plug into an initiative. These are the four pillars I'd like to describe for you before I conclude my remarks. The first of those is the notion of open government data. President Obama didn't invent this idea. This is an idea that dates back generations. In fact, again, as a Virginian, this is a Mr. Jefferson innovation. Mr. Jefferson was the first, before we had one, head of the Weather Service. And Mr. Jefferson spoke of the notion that we should share weather data to improve, I suppose, crop performance and other things. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has done something powerful. They've funded all of the raw collection of data. But they've invited the private sector to commercialize that data without any intellectual property constraint or cost. That has birthed a whole industry, a multi-billion-dollar weather industry. How do you find out about the weather? Do you go to weather.com? Is it from your AccuWeather on the TV news? Is it from a whole new series of iPhone apps that have emerged, that have taken that data and produced something useful for you? Now, mind you, the government is the source of that data. But we don't disparage the private sector, we celebrate. By all means, take this information and make it relevant. One entrepreneur is turning it into a tool to create crop insurance against climate change. But that's the power of open data. You don't need permission. It's our asset. We've paid for it. Let's put it to work. Healthcare has done this better than anyone. And it's because of the work of my successor, Todd Park, that I share with you the following Wheel of Awesomeness. This is a term he likes to use in his remarks. I'm paying homage to Todd. What I want to share with you is just the wide-ranging portfolio of breakthroughs made possible by a simple, low to no-cost government action. The ability to publish data in machine-readable form and making it accessible to entrepreneurs and innovators free of intellectual property constraint or other bureaucracy. I'm just going to share with you a few stories on this slide. The first is of an emergency room doctor named Peter Hudson, who had come to visit me at the White House earlier in 2010. Now, I have to be honest with you. How he came to see me in the White House meant that I was nervous and anxious about the visit. He had asked his senator, Michael Bennet, to write a letter to the White House asking if I would meet this company. You take the meeting out of respect, but you're wondering, what is in this guy's agenda? What's he going to ask for? What's this about? And, you know, there's only so many hours in the day, so you're wondering, what is going to come out of this conversation? Well, I said, Peter, I'd love to visit with you. We'll keep it short, but I'd love to understand what it is that you want to do. And it turned out, all he wanted to do was celebrate the iPhone app that he built as an emergency room dock, and to see if there was any way this could help the country. You see, Peter was frustrated. He was frustrated that too many people were showing up in the ER that didn't need to be there. And his thought was, if he could educate people, perhaps they would voluntarily choose to seek care at the appropriate setting, a clinic. So iTriage was born to help facilitate that educational process. And when we brainstormed, we talked about the fact that Todd was building this open data movement. Peter immediately went searching for the data set that might be relevant to incorporate into his product. We keep a database. By the way, it had been available, quote unquote, online, but you'd have to visit a government website to access this. A database of all the federally qualified health centers in America. Those that are subsidized to provide lower cost access to the poor. Now, I've got to be honest with you, not a lot of folks visit that government website and do the query search terms. So technically, it's open and available, but it's not really in people's use and hands. iTriage said, let me load the data into my application, and naturally, as part of the workflow of the application, if it suggests that you can go to a clinic, we'll suggest to you a list of these low-cost clinics, and you can choose to go to them. He stood on stage at the Health Data Palooza in 2011, and he announced that 1 year into this program, without any marketing budget, muss or fuss, he generated over 100,000 referrals to federally qualified health centers. These centers, by the way, can't afford advertising or any other, kind of traditional means of getting access to customers. Yet, open data allowed for these individuals to benefit from that asset that had been in their community all along, but may not have been known. Or the story of Simcat. Simcat is a startup of two Johns Hopkins University medical students. Johns Hopkins is where I went to college, so I was particularly proud of this story. Johns Hopkins medical students felt that patients should be better educated on these conditions, and these words are pretty scary. So what they decided to do is invite people on their smartphones to enter symptoms. And with each symptom, it could calculate a probabilistic algorithm. What's the likely diagnosis? Now, it's not a doctor telling you what you've got. It's computing the probability based on the symptoms you've presented. So it's not giving medical advice. Well, what happens when you push the word appendicitis? Because that may not be a word I understand. The National Library of Medicine is the world's largest repository of medical knowledge. And they chose to open up their data through an application programming interface, an API, which is basically the infrastructure of the internet economy, basically. And what that meant is that the folks at Simcat, when you push appendicitis, can send the message to the National Library of Medicine, find me the most relevant articles from the best and brightest minds around the world that have been published and are available through PubMed, the Library of Medicine's repository of these articles, and spit back the most relevant ones that relate to appendicitis. Let's bring the National Library of Medicine to you, Michael. This power, this simple tool has enabled two graduate students without any real funding or capacity to design these tools, they're doctors, to access that information and bring it to life. Final story on open data. I must pay homage to another open data innovator, and that would be President Ronald Reagan. Again, this is a bipartisan initiative. President Ronald Reagan, in the aftermath, if you recall this tragic episode, a Korean jetliner had been essentially attacked, I don't know what the right word is, in the Russian airspace. In part because the pilots didn't have accurate navigation as to where they were on the line. They crossed into airspace. And President Reagan knew that our Defense Department had floated satellites that could provide something you might know called the Global Positioning System, or GPS. President Reagan decided to allow the commercial use of the GPS signal so that airliners could access it. And increasingly, and Ed Felton's got his little smartphone there, his tablet, I bet you that's got a GPS. Is that a GPS chip in it?
Yeah.
It does. Now, President Clinton further enhanced this by removing some of the filters. At the time, Reagan had imposed filters to say we should have more precise location in the DoD than the civilian population, and so, but that became a hack people could work around, so it wasn't really effective, so they removed the filters. But how does that relate to healthcare? David von Sickle had been a researcher at the CDC, and he came to the conclusion that asthma was an information problem. Not one that required mist. It did, but not exclusively. It was an information problem. Anybody in the room an asthmatic or have a child that's asthmatic? Okay. Can you recall the last time or location where your child had an attack? Right? You think you would remember, but you don't really know, and it's not something you capture. What von Sickle did was, for about 15 bucks, when they hit commercial scale, he can insert a GPS chip on the asthma inhaler itself. So every time the patient depresses the inhaler, it records the time and location based on GPS. It feeds the data back to the doctor, who interprets the results and says, by the way, here's some patterns. You might want to avoid X, Y, or Z neighborhoods at certain times of the day. In his very first trial, not clinical trial, not scientifically valid, but in his 50, prototypes, they cut uncontrollable asthma 50%. Folks, this is the third leading cause of admission in the emergency room. This is big dollars. If we could avoid uncontrollable asthma attacks by better information, this is better for the patient, better for the Medicare budget, Medicaid budget, better for the country. So this is open health data in action. What about open health data as a service? You recall the Affordable Care Act. A little controversial policy, but one of the elements of the Affordable Care Act was that within 90 days of passage, Secretary Sebelius had to launch a startup called healthcare.gov, the nation's most comprehensive library of public and private health insurance options in the country. She also chose to ask for information that had never before been made public. Information like the monthly premium, average, or the estimate. Information like how often people pay that estimate, or do they pay a surcharge after they go through the paperwork? And you find out that they're a little sicker than you thought. And you slap a surcharge on them. Or the denial rate. How often do people apply for this plan and get denied? Well, at healthcare.gov, all of that information is available. How many of you have visited healthcare.gov? Why? Good for you. We'll get into that in Q&A. But the reality is, who knows healthcare.gov? It's another .gov website. How many of you heard of U.S. News or World Report? Well, through data as a service, we can deliver all of the same information at healthcare.gov to anybody else who wishes to render that information on their website. U.S. News or World Report has launched the Insurance Finder, which is pretty cool looking. It's got a nice family on it. You got some information. All of the data for U.S. News and World Report's Health Insurance Finder comes from the healthcare.gov API. To quote my buddy and successor Todd Park, we are successful if 90% of the usage of healthcare.gov isn't on healthcare.gov. It's a powerful weapon. Don't make people come to government. Dispense information and government to people where they are. It's the power of open data. Number 2, let's act as an inpatient convener. This is a new front in policymaking because this does not require a change in law, nor does it require, typically, an increase in budgets. But nonetheless, it has a huge impact. I want to share with you how I came to appreciate this opportunity in the throes of a very important priority for the president, one that I didn't have a clear answer as to how I would address. Last August, the president gave a speech about veterans. He said, I challenge the private sector to hire 100,000 veterans when they come home from Iraq and Afghanistan because unemployment rates for veterans is higher than the unemployment rate for the general population, which is counterintuitive. These guys are well trained, they take great orders, they're disciplined, but they have a higher unemployment rate. We had a problem. How will veterans find jobs associated with employers who have this commitment? That is, they would like to reach out and help veterans find jobs. Under one scenario, we would establish a website, www.veteranscomehero-to-find-for-committed-jobs.gov or .com. Now, mind you, Veterans Day is in November, so this would have been like 90-day turnaround. We couldn't get the RFP on the street in 90 days. We couldn't get the intention to write an RFP on the street in 90 days. So that was a non-starter. The question, though, was could we do something about it with the private sector? I thought of this as a search problem. Veterans searching for jobs and employers trying to invite people to find their job listings and encourage them to apply. If you had a search problem, who would you call? Anyone? Who would you call? Google. I called Google. I did a lot of calling at the White House, and they take your calls. It's the White House. It's kind of cool. And I get a hold of this guy, Guha, who is the search architect genius at Google. And he said, guess what? You're in luck. Google, Microsoft, and Yahoo formed a joint venture called Schema.org. Search problems of this sort we work on together. If you could get the job industry to agree how to mark up jobs on the internet, we can get that as an endorsed standard through Schema.org. I said, can we do this in 90 days? They said, it's only about 10 or 15 pieces of information. You can do it out whatever you want. Just get us a draft version of the schema. I asked my intern. Here's a little secret at the White House. Don't have a lot of staff. Right, Cece? We rely on, by any means necessary, including interns. So I asked my intern, could you take a stab at this schema thing for job postings? And lo and behold, he was capable of turning it around. And again, people take calls from the White House. I called all the major job boards. Monster, this, that, and the other. And I said, hey, we're thinking of doing this. Would you be so kind as to give feedback on this job posting schema? If a job on the internet is marked up with what's called invisible ink, or for those of you in the tech industry, metadata, we could find those job listings on the internet that happen to come with a veteran hiring commitment. Simple enough idea. They said, sure, and we turned it around within not even 60 days. Everybody endorsed this. But then the president said, I'm going to have an announcement for a whole range of things we're going to do for veterans on Veterans Day. Could we do something to help for those early employers who've signed up? What can we do to get them connected? Well, here was a little more complicated, convening power. But you dangle the prospect of an invitation to the Rose Garden for a White House ceremony, and a lot of engineers show up in a lot of ways. By Veterans Day, we had over 800,000 job listings on the internet tagged under the schema that convey a veteran hiring commitment. We're now north of 1.6 million voluntarily tagged, and that screenshot comes from a joint venture between the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Google, and others. You've heard that announcement last week called VetNet, where they're putting a whole machinery around helping veterans transition to the civilian workforce. This schema cost the taxpayers $0. We did not require use of this schema in the private sector. It was a voluntary, industry-adopted collaboration. But here's the best part. We opened up this data set through an API as well. It went live in November. By February, I was in San Francisco with Dr. Jill Biden. We were having an event called Apps for Heroes, celebrating all these random folks who built products and services, helping veterans find jobs using that information from the Veterans Job Bank. And I wanted to share with you the story of Tony Webster to give you a sense for the pace of change. The night before the event, I was doing an event at a headquarters of a software company called Twilio on a subject that had nothing to do with veterans or jobs. It was about getting underprivileged youth connected to the tech industry. Unrelated. At the end of it in Q&A, I just happened to be excited about the fact that the president, or I should say the second lady, was coming into town, and I had permission to announce that she was coming and why she was coming, so I just said it. No reason, I just did. I was excited. And the CEO of the company, Twilio, said, "Can we get an invitation?" Now, it's a room of 200 people, press. I was like, oh, this is awkward. No, you didn't get the memo. You have to have already built the application to be invited. He said, "No, I heard that." I said, "Okay, but it's like the afternoon, and the event is tomorrow, and you don't even know what I'm talking about." He says, No. You've given me the information. If we build the app, can we do this? Now I'm negotiating. And it's bad because, honestly, Secret Service is pretty powerful. You can't just like get someone in the room. You got to vet the people. I was like, all right, what am I going to do? I said, okay, if you get it by 9 a.m., the event was in the afternoon, maybe we could try to see what's possible. He sent an email an hour later to 75,000 people on his developer list. And he said, if you want to meet the second lady, please fill out the app, do something to help veterans, and you'll get invited. Tony Webster got the message and decided to go to a coffee shop and began working on this app. It took him a couple of hours. He built something called herojobs.com or .org, I forget which one it was. And it did the following. It asks the veteran to enter 3 pieces of information. Your cell phone number, your military code, which is the code of what you did in the military, and your zip code. It pings in real time the civilian military translating service that the Department of Labor put on, so you can take the military code and translate it to civilian skills. It uses the zip code to query the jobs bank for jobs in that zip code that are including skills requirements that match back to the civilian skills that associate with that veteran. And it takes the cell phone number because it text messages for free 5 relevant job leads for you in your neighborhood every morning. Ed Felton, Tony Webster built that in a couple of hours. We didn't pay Tony Webster. He wasn't planning on building this tool. But the reaction, the possibility, the engagement is because we built a standard, opened it up, and invited participation. We are taking this play across government, in healthcare and energy, opening up data. One of our proudest initiatives was the series of colored buttons. A blue button for health, a green button for energy. We were going to call it a red button in education, but we've decided to stop the color motif, and now it's just called a My Data button. And the idea is the industry that holds data on you should give you a button so that you can download that data at your will. So what does that mean? In green button, we ask the utilities, you know how much energy I'm consuming every 6 seconds if I have a smart meter. Yet I get a monthly bill with one value. There's a lot of data in between the one value in the month and what you know of me. You should give me my data. We invited the utilities to voluntarily agree to adopt this standard, and they did. California was the first to get out of the gate because the CIO at PG&E had come out of retailing. She was Karen was at Sears and Kmart. So it took 90 days for her to turn around this My Data service, and tens of thousands of Californians have already downloaded their own data. Mellon Startup, as a startup, said if a commercial building owner did the same, I could benchmark the energy efficiency of that building against the EPA portfolio manager. In other words, download the energy consumption pattern of my building and find out if I've got energy efficiency opportunities. Free, lightweight, and simple. Health, energy, and education data all opening up thanks to the new empowerment tools of government playing this convening role and nudging the industry towards opening up. I just wanted to say a word about my third grade teacher, Mrs. Brusheye. She doesn't know I'm going to say this, but I want you to know why it was relevant that I brought her here and why it was relevant for me to reconnect with her in my remarks. And forgive me as I go a few more minutes beyond my allotted time. In the third grade, my family moved to Plainsboro. I had been in Ewing. Ewing wasn't the best school district in New Jersey. To complement the schools, my grandmother, who didn't speak English, made me do math homework every day before I could go out and play. She wasn't very popular to me in that context, but it was grateful. I showed up in the third grade to the elementary school in Plainsboro and had Mrs. Brusheye as my teacher. And she may not even remember this, but what had happened was she had identified to some degree that perhaps my math was a little further ahead of the other kids in the class. She found a way to keep me occupied on math by allowing me to work on problems during the period of time in the school day when the kids were doing math. I could work a little bit further on my own pace. In a sense, she personalized my learning, which, by the way, great teachers do. What makes a great teacher is not that they're the best orator in the classroom. It's that they personalize the learning for every student. She did that for me. President Obama believes that everybody should have personalized learning. It's not easy. And probably with today's rules and regulations, I'm not even so sure you'd be allowed to do that. I'm not so sure if that was a violation of some rule, but it worked. It worked mostly because it gave me a lot of confidence. Forget the math. It gave me confidence and courage to do great things because I felt like, hey, she believes in me. I should do something. So this standard is but one small little cornerstone of that personalized learning economy. It's what Arnie called the Learning Registry. Arnie Duncan and I announced this in January of last year. The idea is simple. We should open up education data. How many learning objects on the internet help people learn? Millions of objects. Lesson plans from teachers, YouTube videos of the Mars rover, a whole range of ideas and objects. But they're not tagged in any coherent way that's discoverable and usable. The Learning Registry is that invisible ink all over again. It's a standard to tag any learning object on the internet. So here you see a Mozilla web browser searching for surface area and volume concepts. And it searches not just the internet, but it searches a database of just the tagged learning objects, the education internet on top of the internet. And you can see that it shows lesson plans and other materials that align to that Common Core standard. You can discover Kimberly Bauman's lesson plan on incorporating engineering processes into the class. And if you chose to use that lesson plan, you can have a news feed like Facebook say, oh, by the way, the Mars rover video was just added to a lesson plan that's been posted on the Learning Registry by a CTE teacher in this other part of the country. This will unleash an apps economy to empower teachers and personalize learning for every child in a 24/7 learning environment. And Race to the Top district competition that Arnie just announced, the $400 million, will jumpstart this industry, built on open standards. Here's that example of an apps for teacher in work. This is the story of Kaulani, who I don't know, is a teacher in Washington, D.C. Her lesson plans are shared on a website called Better Lesson, I think it's .com or it might be a .org. And you can see that her lesson plans tagged to the Learning Registry have been downloaded 40,000 times by other teachers. Empowering people. This is not about Khan Academy alone as the greatest orator on the planet to teach XYZ subject. It's about Kaulani or Mrs. Brusheye or others who can do the same. This is coming. Third, the role that prizes, challenges, and competitions play in spurring changes and breakthroughs throughout our government. I don't want to spend as much time on these final two levers because I am in overtime on my remarks, but I just wanted you to know an example of what's possible. The federal government's largest data set on data.gov, when it was launched by my colleague Vivek Kundra, the CIO, was the Federal Register. Has anyone in this room read the Federal Register? It is awful. For budget purposes, they put it in 7-point font, 3 columns on a page. It's unbelievably impossible to read. It's technically open. You can download a PDF version of the Federal Register and read it every day. Whoopee! I'm a carpenter. I want to know if the government's doing anything to affect my life. Do I have to read the Federal Register every morning with coffee to make sure that there has been no proposed reg on carpentry? Or do I hire a lobbyist to go look for this stuff every day on K Street to inform me and my industry of what's going on? Not anymore. We have opened up that data set, and Bob, Dave, and Andrew, who had day jobs, decided that what they wanted to do is respond to a prize. The Sunlight Foundation put up, I think it was a $15,000 or $20,000 prize, Apps for America. Who can make sense out of a government data set and make it relevant for you? Bob, Dave, and Andrew didn't know the first thing about the Federal Register. They looked online and said, what's the biggest file? Because that's how they do. They downloaded the biggest file and said, let me make sense of it. And they said, this is upside down. This should be about setting it so that I can tell you I'm a carpenter, and then you tell me if something relevant happens so that I can engage. Not the other way around. Don't make me read it every day. So they built this app called GovPulse. It came in second place in Apps for America, but they also filed it in another contest called Innovation for America under the Consumer Electronics Show, and they came in first place for that. Fast forward, they won in January. Fast forward to March. The Archivist of the United States is in a panic. It's the 75th anniversary of the Federal Register and the National Archives, and his website stinks. And he's embarrassed. Because, you know, you saw the movie with Nicolas Cage, National Treasure. It's kind of a cool, you know, it's cool, right? It's got to be cool when he shows up on the stage of the National Archives. He picks up the phone and cold calls Bob, Dave, and Andrew. And he says, can you be my website? Take over federalregister.gov. They said, we're not a company. We're like 3 dudes in a coffee shop that built this for fun, for a prize. He said, no, sort it out. We need this. Well, they're like, okay. They launched federalregister.gov. And every 90 days, they add more tools to make it that much more impactful. The most insidious, there's a law that allows regulations to be available for public review 1 day before they're in the Federal Register. But you must physically be in DC to go to the reading room. This is classic, dirty, gross, beltway, butt bandit, Gucci-wearing, loafer, lobbyist, blah, charging all kinds of money to give you access a day before the reg is proposed. Not anymore. They turned on a virtual reading room. The same second it's available in the physical room, Bob, Dave, and Andrew, it's available on federalregister.gov. And on. Because of a prize. Or Victor Garcia, Mexican immigrant at the age of 5, waiting tables at Sizzler. Not sure what he was going to be when he grew up. Saw an ad on television that said you should be an auto designer. Goes to get his degree, is essentially an auto designer, but doesn't get a job in that sector because he didn't have the Princeton, Harvard pedigree. He's a contract worker at Peterbilt. No health benefits. I'm not so sure his management knew his name. Found out his wife was pregnant. Great news. Lacked health insurance. Not so great news. He needed to raise the funds to make sure she had a safe and healthy pregnancy. Victor Garcia finds out, with 20,000 other developers or designers and architects, that DARPA, the nation's R&D wing of the military, tried to do something radical in government acquisition, that they would crowdsource the design of the next combat support vehicle, one capable of medevacing 2 injured soldiers from the battlefield. They gave people less than 4 weeks to respond with a design. And again, if I mentioned to you, it takes the DoD 4 weeks to add a comma to an RFP. They put it out there, and Victor had a fair shot with everybody else to make a difference. He beat out every other design with the flip mode. But his story didn't end with the design. The DoD commissioned that this be built, and you see Victor pictured in front of that vehicle. I made the phone call to DARPA at the end of May, early June, and I said, is there any way the vehicle can make its way to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania by June 24th? And they said, we think so. Victor and the team at Local Motors that produced the vehicle showed up. Why? To receive thanks from the President of the United States, who on that day announced the Advanced Manufacturing Partnership, a new public-private partnership to bring out a resurgence in American manufacturing. Victor Garcia wouldn't be a name you and I know today if it weren't for that prize, that challenge, that competition. My thesis is that every single community in America has a Victor or Victoria Garcia with talent, ready, willing, and able to make a difference. Fourth and final pillar, the ability to attract top talent in solving our challenges. Katie Stanton was an executive at Google. She came to the administration, and Anne-Marie knows, she joined the State Department 3 days before the Haitian earthquake. The minute that earthquake hit, we knew there was no functioning 911 service in Haiti. Katie picked up the phone and called the CEO of Digicel and said, can you establish an SMS code, a text service, so that people that have problems that need answers can text in those concerns? Instantly, they turned on 4636 and broadcast word of this new tool on every radio in Haiti. Second problem. Once those texts are received, who's going to read them? Through Ushahidi and other network collaborators, Katie establishes this network of folks that are going online, checking out those complaints and saying, I'll take this one, I'll take this one. What language do they speak in Haiti? Oops, not English. It's Creole. What do you do with texts in Creole? Katie finds Crowdflower, a startup in Silicon Valley, who does distributed tasks. Crowdflower decides that they're going to take the Creole text messages and invite the public to translate them in real time. Here you have no 911 service, but a workaround, a text messaging platform that's converting to Creole and dispatching through a voluntary collaborative. They fielded tens of thousands of complaints and concerns. You see the actual texts of some of them. I see people trapped under a building, and they're alive. At this location, send help. Anybody want to venture a guess the average turnaround time from when these messages are posted to when they're dispatched for help? 10 minutes. You know the story. 10 minutes. That's what a startup can do. A lean government startup collaborating with the public and private sectors to make a difference. It's what allowed President Obama to hold the hand up of the new, in his hand, the new mortgage disclosure form, which was called for in the Dodd-Frank legislation, which, because of the way Washington works, would not be official and legal under regulation for another couple of years. Upon passage of the bill, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau launched a startup of its own. And they dispatched the American people to help figure out what the mortgage disclosure form should look like. Instead of having multiple forms, they've collapsed them into one. And they gave the American people a choice. Here are 2 drafts. Which one do you like and why? Which one don't you like and why not? 15,000 Americans, and you see the heat map, gave feedback on those forms, which gave the president the confidence to present that form when he gave his speech on mortgage reform in Falls Church earlier in the year. Finally, and I'm sorry I took so long in my lecture today, but finally, this new model of government, open innovation, connecting entrepreneurs and innovators as problem solvers, using these 4 techniques, is only possible if we skill up our workforce and our country to meet these challenges. You will hear President Obama speak at length about the importance of STEM education. But I wanted to convey to you today that when you hear that message, it's not about the PhDs in physics, but it's about STEM for everyone. This is a chart we commissioned in Virginia when I was the Secretary of Technology, and a retired NASA scientist named Jim Batterson put it together. And he described for me, you cannot be a tradesman in today's economy as an auto worker and not understand the possibility of engineering and technology in your work. Our challenge as a nation is to uncover the hidden talent and to connect them into these STEM careers so they not only can be successful in their lives for their generation and for the future generations, but together we can solve problems. My final story, and I'll end it at this, is the story of Elantis Hall, a 34-year-old part-time bartender who made a whopping $4,000 last year and had been struggling on public benefits. She has kids. She had been in and out of community college for nearly a decade, but no degree. And it was not clear to anyone what she would do for the next decade and beyond. I embraced Detroit as part of the President's Strong Cities, Strong Communities pilot initiative. And we arranged for an IT boot camp to be made available at the Wayne County Community College for free. And we used the program that Infosys, the large IT shop in India, they train 18,000 developers a year. We asked them if they could bring that curriculum to Wayne County and teach it to folks with no background in technology as an experiment, to try. Elantis' minister encouraged her and others to join in this course. And she was with 75 others who took a chance. No background in technology at all. Yet Elantis Hall scored a 92% on the ability to identify buggy software. It's good enough to join Ed Felton's team. She graduated with a B+. And now she's got a full-time job at $30,000 a year with benefits, working for Galaxy Solutions, a healthcare IT company in Detroit. And I spoke to Elantis, and her voice was beaming. I have a LinkedIn profile. She has a future. How many Elantis Halls are in America with the capacity to connect to this innovation economy? But they're held back. Not because they're not trying, but because we have failed them in bringing about new products and services to try to bring this out of them. I'm hopeful that with the Open Innovators Toolkit, we're going to see experimentation of this sort take place in every city, county, state, and at the federal level. And together we're going to resurge that American spirit, regain our mojo so that we can make a difference again and live up to what the Queen said when she saw us at Jamestown, that the American century is alive and well and it will continue for the decades to come. Thank you so much for hearing me out. All right, I went way into overtime. I probably pull me aside from the crane, pull me off the stage. Any questions you might have? Questions, thoughts, concerns, reactions?
And please come down to the microphone again.
Thanks for a very exciting and innovating presentation. I'd like to discuss the open education with respect to university-level presentation material. And to a lesser extent, and without trying to throw water on this delightful fire,
sure,
at lower levels. I mean, there's a fundamental element, and that is you're using, and I approve of this, but you're using government funds to collect a great deal of information, which is now provided essentially as a seed mine to distributors, some of whom, of course, are for-profit enterprises. Now that has the social benefit of disseminating information widely and at low or no cost to the general public, while empowering an economic opportunity for those clever enough to commercialize it. At the sub-university level, you're effectively providing information for-profit schools that is also being provided to not-for-profit schools and giving them an inherent economic advantage. At the university...
Can we get a question, please?
No, I understand this question. I got it. But it requires a clarification from me, and I'll tell you that.
I'm sorry?
I'll clarify my remarks to give you a sense that it's not what you think it is.
At the university level, if you try to find openly class materials, aside from, let's say, the recent enterprises by MIT and a couple of other major schools, it's much more difficult. There you still have a relatively closed environment. You may find an outline, but course content is actually still being merchandising both at public and private institutions. And it would seem to me that there should be some way to utilize this open education tool at the university level so as to improve general education across the board.
So it's a powerful question, and I want to clarify a few pieces. Just because you've tagged your object through the standard in the Learning Registry does not mean it's free and available. Proprietary interests, including Pearson and Houghton Mifflin, are tagging their content to the standard. They've got a business model challenge. How do I, once discovering the material, pay for access to it in the right way? But they're willing to have that conversation. When it comes to what this standard might mean in any context, the beauty of a simple, lightweight technical standard is that you can do what you want. If Ed tomorrow decides to tag all the supplemental materials that he has intellectual property rights to in his own course to the registry to make them discoverable, he can do so tomorrow, no permission needed, no rule or anything. In fact, I bet you a number of university professors have already done that. The point is, it's just a new piece of infrastructure. And that's what's different and exciting about this. Now, to be sure, in higher ed, there are whole new models that are emerging around the general ed courses. Startups like, well, there's a bunch of the startups that have emerged right now, but they're all based on, my friend, my classmate at the Kennedy School, actually, Burke Smith, built Straighterline, straighterline.com. His thesis is, let's use online learning to standardize the 70% of the general ed courses that everybody needs, upgrade their performance, and improve the quality of that educational experience. That's a business model debate that we're all going to be having anyway. The question here is that information discoverable and reusable, and how might that be best used? It could be that veterans really respond well to the way math is taught by this one professor at the University of Iowa, because that professor, he or she, incorporates military concepts into that lecture. And knowing that and expanding and accessing that might be relevant to someone who's at Rider University who's struggling with that same subject but could benefit. I think that's where we're seeing the innovation flourish, is first let's tag as much as we can, and then let's repurpose all that information in new business models. And eventually we're going to have to tackle the tough question of bringing a productivity agenda to higher ed, which is probably a very uncomfortable conversation for Princeton and others, but is something the country is going to need to have. Yes?
Marty.
Hi. I was curious, how do you sell this idea and get agencies in the government to mobilize their resources to make data more open?
It helps when the President of the United States requires it. So when President Obama said, I believe in this stuff, we were able to write a directive from the White House Office of Management and Budget declaring that this is what the agencies, we changed the default setting of government. The real funny story that I didn't share with you is that the Labor Department literally, before the president's election, was blocking access to 401k management fee data that had been in plans submitted every year to the Department of Labor. So a startup had to, like, 5 cents a page Xerox copy all of that content. The minute the president wrote the directive, that same staffer said, oh, I guess the rules have changed, you can have the CD-ROM. And they uncover a $4 billion hidden tax on retirees, future retirees, because they've been paying high management fees relative to their peers. And they take this concept to life through a company called Brightscope. So it happens because of leadership. If the next president of the United States, following Obama, chooses to ignore all of this, then it's probably not going to be as much of a focus. But for this president, in this time, it's a big deal. And he's all over it. Yes, sir.
Yes. Should the United States relinquish control of its internet to the United Nations.
So this is one of those, with all due respect, hyperbolic conversations. There's never like all or none in this situation, okay? What he's describing is that the UN has had a charter to manage telecom networks so that if a phone call is placed from here to Belize, it works, okay? And that's run by the ITU. The internet has an engineering community that's largely multi-stakeholder, not government-driven. The Internet Engineering Task Force. So the standards and the improvements on the internet are born of this multi-stakeholder approach. I joined my colleagues in the National Economic Council. We wrote an internet policy framework that the OECD countries have all signed on to that embrace the spirit of multi-stakeholder leadership on the internet. The US position is clear and it is defendable and sustainable. But we don't necessarily slam the door on global communities because they have a role to play in the telecommunications networks. So the question is, retaining the multi-stakeholder framework of the internet is US policy. It's been stated and affirmed in the OECD. And I have no concern that that's going to be under attack. People were concerned that the ITU meeting on this issue would have led to a different conclusion. I just don't think it's as much of a concern. So, and I'll let Ed knows more about this than I do, but I feel pretty good about where we are on that subject. Yes, sir.
Thank you for sharing your excitement. It's an exciting area. My question is, you know, there are many institutions not at the broad federal level, but more on a specialized level like the SBA, NIH, FDIC. When will initiatives like this
every day
migrate down to
They're there now. If you go to the agency webpage /open, they have to publicly declare how they're going to engage with you on these techniques and tools. So with all due respect, I had little to do with most of these stories other than celebrate, champion, nudge, have a conversation, encourage. These are done by people in the agencies who deeply believe in this. What the most powerful weapon we unleashed in this formula were you might call them, quote, bureaucrats, but we call them people who care about public service. They woke up and said, I don't have to wait for the next reauthorization of my agency bill to make a difference. Or I don't have to fight the budget battles praying that we're going to get something only to have it be removed in some budget negotiation and therefore I can't advance the ball. You're telling me that I can achieve my mission objectives by opening up data? And I have authority to do that? Sign me up! And all the cabinet, we had a cabinet meeting where the president basically challenged them to this, and we have chief of staff meetings with the, the various bureaucracies inside the White House, basically saying, hey, look how great Sebelius is on this, and what are you doing about that, Napolitano? And hey, did you hear that story? So you've created a culture where this is now, it's standard in the Obama administration, to be sure.
I have a small comment.
Yeah.
Because I've gone onto the SBA.gov site. It's dense, it's difficult to navigate, and the information is sort of layered way below. So do these people, or is there any feedback process?
Well, SBA was one of the first. Small Business Administration, it's dense. What they did was they launched Apps for Entrepreneurs, one of these prizes. They opened up all of the historical contracts database and other things and invited folks to build useful tools on top. So from that, people in the green energy economy have found, show me all the SBIR awards that tie to the green energy economy, and they've created a bit of a marketplace for those companies that are looking for secondary funding. I think it's called OnGreen. So you're right, the SBA.gov site might be a little denser, but there are already app developers who've broken through and have built products and services. Go to challenge.gov, search for apps for entrepreneurs, and you'll see the results, the apps that were built on that data set.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Maybe a couple more and then we'll...
This one and this one.
Yeah, I'll be fast to make sure we don't...
So this is a question about sort of personal information. There's a lot of information that people might consider to be personal that isn't legally protected, but it's been practically protected because you had to go to some archive in Washington in person to get it.
Yes.
As this becomes available, how do you balance people's sort of privacy interests in their data?
This is more common at the state level than the federal level because a lot of personally identifiable, like for example, there are 5,000 Virginians who are on boards and commissions. All of them have to disclose all kinds of details, home address, blah, blah, blah. Under FOIA, that is disclosable data. But it's a headache to get it, so it's not as common. We indexed all of this to Google Sitemap protocol, and now it's much more discoverable. What happened was people started finding their address on the internet in an unexpected way, so they asked the legislature to revisit. Here's what we did. What data are we collecting that is extraneous to the mission of the form or the agency in question? Turns out we ask for your social on forms that don't need your social. Well, don't ask for the social. It's just common sense. So we put up a little task force that said, let's now look back on what the data is that we're collecting and be smarter about how we use that. It is attention, but under the law, that information is disclosable. So making it easier to find isn't like an interpretation of the law. It is law. It's now judgment of people to say, look, I don't like that law, change the law, fine. But as today, it is law. If it's disclosable under Freedom of Information Act, it should be disclosable. Our presumption was defaulted to open, and that's why we're making this stuff more accessible.
Last
yes.
question.
Or maybe second to last. I'll do fast.
I was wondering whether you thought that this, I'm sorry, the bookmarking, the phrase that you used.
Tagging
was really enough, especially specifically for public data that's already available, that is hard for people to find. And I'm thinking specifically about a website called healthindicators.gov.
That's the same, right.
Yeah. All right.
You're right. Healthindicators.gov has all the raw data.
Yes.
And you can access that via API, and the raw files are on healthdata.gov.
Okay, I guess from, this is just anecdotally, among my colleagues here, no one has yet, I'm the first person among my colleagues to have heard of it. So just, is there, other than tagging, is there another, medium for
You're pointing out an obvious challenge. If I were to poll all of you of any of the stories that I shared today, how many of you heard any of them? A couple of you. But like 90% of you, the answer is no. Media doesn't like to report this stuff, which is their choice. The president certainly gave a lot of speeches on this stuff. McKinsey estimates that 200 new products and services have been born just on open health data alone. We've been doing codathons and hackathons in cities and universities, everywhere we go, to draw attention to this. I was at the World Bank recently. We did a sanitation hackathon at 10 universities around the world, talking about exposure to sanitation data and so forth. So it is probably not the best use of taxpayer dollars to advertise a lot of this in a big way, but it'll organically get out there. And the minute you hit a hot knife through butter issue and someone does something that is meaningful for you, they're going to have the ability to make a difference here. But partly the reason I'm here and giving these lectures, students who graduate from here should use this technique when they get into government, because it's a fairly low cost, high impact tool. That was the message I was trying to convey. Last question.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, to answer your question, my friend's wife was pregnant and was looking for healthcare for her.
Fascinating. So he went to healthcare.gov.
Yeah.
Was it successful for him?
Well, he's a visiting scholar, so he's not a US citizen, so there was some complications like that.
Got it.
That's why I was a bit more finding out about that. And my question is with regards to open source software and the speed of adoption in the US government of it. I mean, for example, imagine the more than 1 million US government employees not having to use Microsoft Office and pay those license fees and all of those. What's maybe your position, your thoughts on that, and is it going to sort of speed up as we go along?
Well, my colleague, the CIO, Vivek Kundra, was responsible for managing the $76 billion of government IT spending, and he put forward a very bold and aggressive plan to move from an old architecture to new cloud-based technologies, and it's having an effect, to be sure. The agencies are aware of this. A lot of the problem here is procurement, because the way the governments procure things, we end up, when all the cycle is done and the protests are issued, we're buying 10-year-old technology, which was novel at the time they initially conceived of doing the project. So by moving to APIs, I'll just give you one little example. The VA does medical scheduling for doctors. They spent $127 million over 9 years to make outpatient scheduling easier online. Not a single function was made available. It didn't work. They turned the whole thing off. Complete waste. VA, the Veterans Administration, Veterans Affairs. We've now opened up an API to the legacy Vista system, and what we're saying now is, instead of $127 million, we're going to pay a few vendors in the single-digit millions to plug in and demonstrate that their app actually works, as opposed to how well they wrote the RFP. And that will mean cheaper, better, faster technologies into the government because we've opened them up. DARPA probably had the most powerful program here called Transformative Apps, which is to bring, instead of one Pashtun to English translator for the warfighter in Afghanistan, there should be 1,000 options, and let them say, you know, in this village, use this one, and let them socially discover options and download them. I have taken up too much time. Thank you so much for hearing me out.
That was a wonderful, yeah, hi. Let me just say that technology does not, excuse me, technology doesn't sell itself. Actually, it's people exactly like Aneesh and his charisma and his excitement that has made such a big difference in the government. I want to thank him. I want to thank the Riley family and the Chopra family for attending the Connor Riley lecture. Thank you very much.